Next up is Sally Mayweather, a host of the Agorist Podcast and of the Agora Podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. And I appreciate everything you guys put this together. I think these sorts of events and conferences are even more important nowadays. Hopefully, next year when this coronavirus nonsense goes away, hopefully we can do this in person. But I just want to speak real quick about why I think Bitcoin Cash is really the best choice and the only choice really for agorists and for counter-economic purposes. Be honest with you, I was sort of surprised when I was sort of asked to speak here because I'm not a computer scientist or a cryptographer. I'm not a blockchain developer or a coder. I'm not any of those things. Really, I'm just an agorist. And what that means is we just look for ways to engage the black and gray markets in order to peacefully subvert or undermine the red and pink markets, the state apparatus. Insofar as like gray markets go specifically, and that's what we're talking about when we're dealing with cryptocurrencies, what we're trying to do is we're looking for goods or services that are legal but highly regulated. And then what we try to do is we try to step in with unregulated alternatives, usually at a cheaper cost and or a higher quality. Now, I believe, and I think like if I could convey one point in my few minutes today, this would be it. I believe that if Gandhi can bring the British Empire to its knees by utilizing gray market salt, well then there's surely no reason why you and I can't bring the modern state to its knees by utilizing gray market currencies. I don't know if you guys are familiar with architecture, but even if you aren't, you've probably heard the term Keystone before. A keystone is just the brick that sits atop an archway. It sort of holds everything together, locks the other bricks in place. But what's remarkable about the keystone is that an archway, the structure itself isn't actually weight bearing until the keystone is in place. But once it is, then we can dig tunnels under rivers and we can drive trains and cars on top of these things. So they become very strong very quickly just because of one brick. Well, in my view, when we examine the state apparatus, the keystone is the central bank, right? It really is the glue that holds everything together. And if you guys saw Jeffrey Tucker's talk, he did a great job walking through this. But it is true that even in a sound monetary system, any and every state will always and necessarily pose a threat to us. But in a fiat monetary system, that threat becomes expanded, right? It's much more immediate. It's much more severe. And you can think about it like the Gambinos or whatever gang is local to your neck of the woods, right? We all know that these are bad guys, but we can imagine how much worse they would be if they were endowed with a successful counterfeiting operation, right? They would be able to hire more goons and expand their territory and get their hands into other illicit activities that they were previously unable to. Well, it turns out that criminal enterprises scale quite nicely because the same is true of the state, right? It's because of the central bank that the state is able to invade countries at will and carry on wars that last for decades, right? It's because of the central bank that they can afford to play world police. The list goes on. It's because of the central bank that free men and women are turned into slaves vis-a-vis welfare dependency. It's through the high time preference induced by their cheap money that our voluntarily adopted societal norms and institutions are slowly being eradicated. It's because of the central bank that every single day that we wake up, the only thing standing between us and bankruptcy, between us and hyperinflation, is the benevolence and the wisdom of a small group of politically connected bankers who have frankly demonstrated neither benevolence nor wisdom. So to the agorist, this is truly just an absolutely intolerable situation. And what we try to do is we're looking for gray market alternatives that will sort of relieve this problem, sound monetary alternatives. So then the question quickly becomes, well, which monetary alternative should we be promoting? Which one has the best chance of disintermediating the state? And to answer that question, we have to turn to the economists. Karl Menger, the founder of the Austrian school, who's famous for, among other things, his regression theorem, he writes that a commodity has to have some sort of utility, some use value, prior to it becoming money. Well, in the case of Bitcoin, no one really knew what that utility was, right? In the beginning, the first few years there, it sort of really was just kind of magic internet money. That is until Ross Ulbricht came along. He showed us what you can do with a peer-to-peer currency, right? He showed us that you can have these uncensorable transactions. You can have a truly free and open marketplace. And we can have the Agora if we actually want it. So that's why I think it's so important to stress the utility of cryptocurrencies as a means of exchange. We also know from the economists that the market will only select the most saleable of commodities for use as exchange media, right? Mises spoke about the inevitable tendency of the market to narrow itself down until only one commodity remains, and he called this money. So this is sort of like a cheat sheet for agorists. You can think about it like that. If we know what saleability is, if we know what the most saleable commodity is, then we can sort of just pick that and run with it and develop that, right? Well, in order to determine what the most saleable commodity is, we have to know what criteria determine saleability. So again, we turn to Menger. In this little book on the origins of money, which everybody should read, everybody in the Bitcoin Cash community, it's like a must read. But in this little book, he says that he leaves us with two lists of factors that constrain the saleability of commodities. One list is a list of factors that constrains the saleability of commodities through space, and another is a list of factors that constrains the saleability of commodities through time. So in regards to the former, the limits on spatial saleability, one of the things he talks about is, he warns us about the cost incurred in transport. So here he's talking about transaction fees. So we can immediately dismiss from consideration all of the sound monetary alternatives that have high transaction fees. And when he talks about temporal saleability, he speaks about, he tells us to be cognizant of their susceptibility to political and social censorship. And this is why gold and precious metals aren't used as exchange media anymore. The state correctly identified confiscability as a weakness in their temporal saleability, and they exploited that weakness when they were establishing their fiat monopoly. So basically what I'm trying to say to sum up this point is if you line up all of the different alternatives to fiat currency, to slave notes, and you use Menger's criteria as a sort of checklist, you quickly come to the conclusion that the most saleable commodity, the one that has the best chance of disintermediating the bank, of getting rid of the cancer that is the central bank, is Bitcoin Cash. So that's why I think agorists should be focusing on the use, promotion, and development of Bitcoin Cash. Since I have time, I also want to get into real quick the counter-economic potential for tokenization, specifically the tokenization of securities and assets. Per Byland, who spoke earlier at this event, brilliantly, by the way, on entrepreneurship. If you haven't seen that talk, check it out. He wrote an article quite a while back in which he identified two types of counter-economic strategies. The first was the vertical strategy, which is just the creation of local production facilities that bypass state regulations, and the second would be the horizontal strategy, which is just the peer-to-peer unregulated exchange. So we have things like the blockchain miner. You're locally producing a currency, and then you have individuals using it as a means of exchange, and we see how potent that can be in a counter-economic sense. The same thing, by the way, is true of 3D printers, right? That's the 3D printer is your local production facility, and you have individuals printing firearms and exchanging them on a free and open market, and that's disintermediating firearms legislation. Well, the same logical structure applies to the tokenization of securities and assets. That's why I think this is really today's black swan, right? The next 3 years, 5 years, I think this is going to be a black swan, because we have things like the Bitcoin.com mint, where individuals are tokenizing their own securities and their own assets, and soon they'll be trading them in a peer-to-peer fashion using things like decentralized exchanges and whatnot. And to me, this spells the death of the SEC and FINRA. And what that means is I think that you're going to see a tidal wave of investment in capital into the market, and that's going to really unleash a tidal wave of innovation. So I'm really excited about that. I think that tokenization will sort of increase adoption, sort of speed up the counter-economic process here. So I'm really excited about that. I think that's all the points I wanted to get to. So I think I will leave it there. And I think we have enough time. If there's any comments or questions, or any of the Bitcoin maximalists want to tell me to go screw, that's cool too.
All right. Great points, Sal. So any questions from the audience? Did you by chance catch the Rogers interview with Anthony Pompliano? I think it was today.
I didn't. I missed that.
It was just him for 2 hours, just saying, I don't know, I consider it kind of like brain dead stuff to Roger to be like, why, like he doesn't care that it's practically impossible to use BTC.
Number go up, right? Number go up. It's funny because you see a lot of them talking about, well, what number should we trade it in at? And the way I think about it is, if you're looking to trade it in for fiat slave notes, you don't understand what we're doing here. So, was that here at this event today, though?
No, that was something separate.
Okay.
Might have been yesterday that it happened. These 2 days have run together for me. Yeah, it's so disappointing. It's been so disappointing to watch over the last 9 years the whole BTC thing degenerate into, the whole number go up, the Wall Streetization, that whole thing,
Yeah, and I think Jeffrey Tucker really hit on some really great points earlier today. He really went through the history very very well. But yeah, it's really sad what they've done to it. And I think one of the things that he said that was so poignant was that if this never happened, right, if we never had this problem, if they didn't prevent the increase in the block size, then we probably would be in a much different place today. Who knows where we'd be at this point in the story of cryptocurrency. Sort of sad when you think about it like that.
It really is, and it redoubles my determination to see BCH flipping BTC within the next few years.
For sure. And when I had him on my show, Jeff, that's one of the things that we spoke about. And I think he said, like, it's hard to time these things, but within Bitcoin, I think he said BTC will still go up a little bit, but I think within like the next 10 to 15 years, he said, you're going to start to see that change. And I frankly agree with him 100%.
Yeah, I think one problem, if, it's not that really flipping BTC is the point of it, but, one problem with people being able to recognize when it happens is, I think most of the liquidity, most of the new people entering BCH are going to do it via peer-to-peer liquidity, at places like local.bitcoin.com. And that may not be reflected, on the centralized exchanges.
True. I think, irregardless, I think that if they don't have if it's not an efficient medium of exchange, then it's basically useless for counter-economic purposes. For the purposes of liberty, it really is just absolutely useless at that point. Maybe, hey, you might buy it and it'll go up, and maybe you can make a few dollars, and God bless, I hope that works out. But that's not what we as agorists are trying to do, right? We're trying to create a freer society. And the only way to do that, I think, is to get rid of the central bank. That is the problem, right? That is the cancer, really, is the central bank. And like I just said, even in a sound monetary system, any government will still pose a threat, but one that has the power to counterfeit is much more ominous. So that's why I think Bitcoin Cash really is probably the most powerful counter-economic tool we have, even more so than like 3D printers and things like that.
Yeah, we have to create the new world in the shell of the old.
Right. Well, that's why it's so important what guys like you are doing, people who are smarter than me, you developers and whatnot, because you guys are the ones creating the infrastructure that guys like me are going to be using in the next decade or so.
I would say Chris Troutner, who was on the stream earlier, is probably more that kind of guy.
Yeah. There's a bunch of them. Vin Romani too. The list goes on. There's really a lot of talented developers in the Bitcoin Cash ecosystem. I think that's one of our main strengths. One of our key selling points right there.
So yes, and also one of the things that we're seeing now in BCH is the use of stable coins. For example, some of these projects are actually using like USDH. I don't know. I'm kind of ambivalent about using stable coins for adoption, but what do you think?
I'll tell you what, I've always been opposed to, look, if you have any currency is pegged to a fiat currency, then that's not stable, right? If it's subject to the whims of bankers, then that's the opposite of stability, right? But with that being said, I think that there are some interesting projects going on that use these stable coins. Like we saw one presentation earlier today on the Bcash card. That's pretty cool, and that uses USDH. So, look, I think that the ecosystem will evolve naturally. You won't see me using fiat currency at all, but hopefully it'll drive adoption. It'll encourage more people to exit the fiat system, even if it's a slow step-by-step process.
Yeah. All right. Very nice. Thank you so much, Sal Mayweather, Sal the Agorist. I'm gonna drop he has some excellent content day in and day out for those of us who are who really get the ideas behind Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. So definitely recommend you follow him. Sal, any final words?
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and happy 4th Day, happy Independence Day.
All right. Thanks, Sal. Really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks, buddy.